Welcome to part 2 of the requirements engineering videos, and in this video we talk about the first activity in requirements engineering, which is requirements elicitation. To elicit means to come up, to recall, to essentially develop requirements, but it's often described also in the Somerville book as a discovery. And this is really an important thing to consider, that it's not about just going out asking 3 people what they want and writing it down, but you need to put a lot of effort into discovering what is really necessary, what is needed. And this course has as a prerequisite another course that is already a lot working with users and user interfaces, so you have heard a lot of this, and that means I'll keep this rather short and really just as a summary. But essentially in elicitation you have a lot of different techniques that you can use to discover the stakeholder needs, and common ones are so-called direct methods like interviews. So you select a group of your stakeholders and you interview them and find out what they need, or you conduct something like a survey, like a questionnaire that you can send to many people. And these methods are all complementary, so it's not like one is the best. For example, interviews give you very, very detailed insights, and they often answer questions like why or how, because you get all the context if you ask a question. You don't only get I need this, but the person, for example, an end user might tell you exactly why that is necessary. You get all the context that is really important. But it's also really expensive. It takes a lot of effort to conduct interviews and then to analyze them in a proper way. Surveys are a lot more efficient. You can send them out to many people, but they tend to be on a level that is more of answering what questions. So they tell you, for example, what is needed, what does the majority of people want or need, but it doesn't tell you why that is the case. So it often lacks the detail. So even though it's a lot cheaper, it has other shortcomings. Now, 2 problems with these direct methods is that you tend to be more on the want level. The people will tell you what they want, and it's very hard to find out the things that are not aware of. And a lot of, especially users, and I think a lot of you can probably relate to that, you might not be able to know what you need until you've tried it out. So it's this typical, I know it when I see it problem. And to get around that, you might have other methods that are indirect, but that might give you a hint on what do people actually need or what is currently not working well. And one of them is, for example, observation. So you can give people, for example, if there is an existing system, you can let people use that. You can observe them and you can see what they do. And in particular, you can see what they do in a strange way, maybe. Maybe they do certain activities in your software in a really complicated way, and that might give you a hint that there is something missing, there's something we need. So this can be a very useful technique to find out what the needs are, to discover them. The problem is, again, this is very expensive, and you need something where you can observe them. So if you develop something that is completely new, there's nothing similar, there's no predecessor or so, then this might be a complicated thing. Similar, you might study existing systems, so not observe the stakeholders using them, but rather study, for example, existing cars. If we develop car software and see what kind of features do they have, what kind of requirements do they have, and try to copy that or try to figure out what is missing from there. So this is something you can look at, and if you have, there might also be documentation or other kinds of documents for these systems that you can study. For example, a user manual, technical documentation for the software or things like that. In the Somerville book, there is also a technique that is described as scenarios, which are detailed descriptions of user flows, essentially. The user gets into the car, switches on the ignition, and then uses the voice control to switch on the radio. This can be an elicitation technique because it gives you a lot of context and it allows you maybe to think about what is missing, what might be needed. But it's also very often a specification technique, so a way of describing your requirements. And we'll get back to that in the next video as well. But just for completeness, in the Somerville book, this is also described as an elicitation technique. Generally speaking, these are the different, or some of the different techniques there are. All of them are taking a lot of time to master really well, and you could do an entire course on just elicitation. For example, conducting interviews in a good way, that you actually don't just get confirmation of what you think, but that users come up with new ideas, is quite a difficult thing to do, and it takes quite some skill and practice to do that, and similarly analyzing that. But in this video, I will not go into much depth into there, just for completeness, having the techniques. And if you need to learn about them or want to learn about them, you just look into the relevant literature on that. Now, there are some additional things to consider or that might be problematic in elicitation. And two things that come up once you have discovered some or all of your needs is that you might have to prioritize them. So typically you come up with lots of different requirements. They are somehow related, but they're also not equally important. Some of them you have to have, some are more nice to have, and everywhere in between. So this is something you need to consider, and this might also, of course, relate to the cost. It could be that you have a really nice feature, but it's also really expensive to implement. So usually there is some kind of cost-benefit discussion. And when we get back to the stakeholders, there might be conflicting interests. So typically, you might have to negotiate between the different stakeholders. Maybe one stakeholder wants something, the other one definitely doesn't want to have the same thing, or they want different things, and you have to somehow agree what is higher priority or what is more cost efficient. And the more stakeholders you have involved, especially if they have power, if it's clients or end users, you might really have to spend a lot of time on these trade-offs and discussing them. So it's not just about finding all the requirements, it's also getting them in a good shape that you know what to implement first, you know what to skip if you run out of time or budget, and you actually satisfy your different stakeholders so that no one is really upset. So this is very briefly a summary of requirements elicitation. And now in the next video, we go into how we specify, how we write down requirements.